My parents called me out of the blue. "We are getting your sister married tomorrow," my father, James, said, his voice full of excitement. "We withdrew all the money from your accounts and sold the house. It is all for her big day." My mother, Nicole, jumped in, saying it was the perfect way to give their youngest daughter the start she deserved. I sat in my Atherton office, the silence of the room amplifying the $1,050,000 theft they had just confessed to with a smile. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. I did not cry. I did not ask why. I did not even yell when James hung up after that single, casual goodbye. I did not feel the world shift. I felt it sharpen. My name is Emily, and for 15 years, I have been a senior financial inspector. My entire life is built on finding discrepancies, tracing hidden trails, and identifying the exact moment a transaction turns into a crime. James and Nicole did not understand that. They thought they were talking to their stable daughter, the one who always has extra. They did not realize they were confessing to an auditor who was already clocked in. I set my phone on the mahogany desk of my home office. Through the window, the fog of Silicon Valley was rolling over the Atherton Hills, cold and gray. It matched the temperature in my chest. I rubbed my eyes, not to wipe away tears, but to summon clarity. This was not a family crisis, it was a balance sheet. And for the first time in 39 years, I was looking at the bottom line. My fingers did not tremble as I pulled my laptop closer. The screen glowed with a clinical blue light, illuminating the digital footprints of their betrayal. I logged into my high-yield savings first. It took 3 seconds. 3 seconds to see the number that should have been $300,000 sitting at zero. The history tab showed a single, massive transfer executed less than 2 hours ago. The recipient? A high-end wedding planning firm in San Francisco. I did not feel a panic attack. I felt a plan forming. In my world, love is a contract, and my family had just breached every single clause. James and Nicole had been overdrawing my compassion for decades, treating my success as a communal resource for their golden child, Victoria. They saw my life as a subscription service they could use for free, but they forgot one thing about subscriptions: you have to keep the provider happy, or the service gets cut. I opened my terminal and began the hunt. I initiated a fraud alert on every single one of my accounts. I did not just freeze them, I flagged them for criminal investigation. I wrote out the notification to the bank's security team: unauthorized access, forgery suspected. The digital doors slammed shut with a series of quiet clicks. Next, I moved to the Atherton property. My parents believed they had sold it. They assumed because they had my old power of attorney, the title was theirs to trade. I opened the county records. The deed was still in a pending state. Caught in the gears of the closing process, I felt a small, sharp smile touch my lips. It was the kind of smile you see on an auditor before they deliver a lethal finding. I drafted a legal block on the house title. I flagged the sale as contested and fraudulent in the system. Within 12 minutes of that phone call ending, I had paralyzed their $1 million heist. The hallway of the hospital had smelled like burnt toast and heavy silence. I remember the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator in the room next to mine and the way the fluorescent lights seemed to vibrate against the back of my eyelids. It was 2 years ago, right after the car accident that nearly ended my career and my life. James had sat at the edge of the bed, wearing his concerned father mask. He held a stack of documents and a silver pen. He told me they were routine supplements, just paperwork to ensure the hospital did not overcharge me. I was in no condition to read fine print. I was groggy, incoherent, and desperate for the safety they promised. I signed. I did not know then that I was signing away my autonomy. They did not just take the authority to talk to my doctors. They took a power of attorney that they immediately weaponized. Within 1 month of my release, they had borrowed $300,000 of my hard-earned savings to cover Victoria's catastrophic failure in the influencer market. She had spent a fortune on high-end camera gear, fake followers, and first-class flights, all while I was struggling to relearn how to walk. I had been the silent investor in their version of a happy home, paying for Victoria's $18,000 semester tuition while James and Nicole told me that I was the strong one, who did not need help. This brought me to the core of their pathology, the trap of cruel normalization. In my family's hierarchy, my competence was not a trait to be celebrated. but a resource to be harvested. James and Nicole had performed a psychological audit on their children long ago and decided that my soul was a communal fund. They had normalized the idea that the successful child exists only to buffer the fragile one from the consequences of her own choices. To them, stealing my signature was not a crime, it was a family tax. They thought that because I hadn't enough, it was only fair to redistribute my life to Victoria. They did not see a daughter in that hospital bed. They saw an unsecured loan with no expiration date. My phone did not stop vibrating. It hummed against the mahogany desk, a persistent, rhythmic reminder that the war had moved from a private phone call to a public stage. I did not pick it up at first. I watched the screen light up with notification after notification. Victoria had finally posted. I knew her patterns better than she knew her own bank balance. She did not just want my money, she wanted to audit my reputation and leave me bankrupt in the eyes of the world. I finally clicked the link. The video was crisp, high definition, and perfectly lit, the professional standard you would expect from someone with 500,000 followers. Victoria was standing in the manicured garden of my Atherton home, the very house she believed our parents had successfully sold to fund her vanity. She had mastered the art of the influencer cry, the kind where the tears are visible but the mascara never runs. I never thought my own sister would try to sabotage the happiest day of my life. She sobbed into the lens. She told her audience that I was bitter and obsessed with control. She claimed that I had it plenty and was only trying to ruin her wedding because I could not stand to see her happy. To her 500,000 followers, I was the villain, the cold, heartless auditor who cared more about a balance sheet than a sister's vows. The comments sections were already a bloodbath. Strangers who did not know my middle name were calling me a monster. I watched the likes climb into the thousands. It was a digital smear campaign, funded by the $300,000 they had just stolen from me. Then came the texts from James. Do not be dramatic, Emily, he wrote. You have more than enough. Victoria needs this start for her image. It is about her future, not your greed. He followed it with a line that tasted like ash. You are lucky we are still including you in the family photos after the scene you are making. Nicole followed up with a Facebook post that was already being shared by our extended family. Some people forget who raised them. It read, it is sad when a child puts their bank account above their mother's heart. The gaslighting was systematic. They were not just taking my assets. They were trying to rewrite history to make their theft look like a virtue. I rubbed my eyes, but there was no panic. Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. I did not answer a single text. I did not comment on Victoria's video. I did not post a defense on Facebook. In my line of work, you do not fight a narrative with more words, you fight it with a forensic trail that leads to a prison cell. David Bauer's office downtown did not feel like a law firm, it felt like an incinerator for lies. David was a forensic accountant, a man who spoke the same language of ledger entries and audit trails that I did. I spread the files across his glass conference table, the documents reflecting the clinical white lights of the ceiling. I showed him the settlement statement for the $300,000 sale of my rental property and the signature page that bore my name. David reviewed the power of attorney document, his eyes narrowing at the date. It overlapped perfectly with the days I spent in the hospital fog after my surgery. He projected the signatures onto a large screen on the wall, my normal, crisp signature side by side with the shaky, irregular scrawl they had used to sell my assets. The pressure, slant, and tremor patterns match samples taken during medical recovery, David said, his voice as cold as my own. This is not voluntary execution, this is document forgery. But I did not bring him here just to confirm the forgery. I was ready to deliver the kill shot. James and Nicole had spent decades thinking I was the sensible, compliant daughter who would never fight back. They thought they were stealing from a solitary woman who had no one to protect her. They had no idea that I had audited my own trust in them a long time ago and found it wanting. David, I said, my voice steady and lethal, check the ownership records for the Atherton house from exactly 12 months ago. He tapped a few keys, and the screen shifted, his eyebrows shot up. A year ago, I had realized that my compassion for my family was a liability I could no longer afford to carry. I had moved the Atherton property, my mortgage-free home worth $750,000, into a non-profit foundation dedicated to training young financial inspectors. The air in the room seemed to freeze. by forging my signature to his sell that house to Victoria's fiancé, Austin. My parents had not just stolen from their daughter, they had committed federal fraud against a public charity. Austin, the polished real estate broker, was not just a spectator. He was the one facilitating the transfer, intending to launder his commission through the wedding expenses. They crossed into criminal territory the moment they touched those foundation assets, David murmured. This was no longer a messy family drama, this was a criminal referral for financial fraud and document forgery. My parents and their golden child were standing on a trapdoor, and they were the ones who had handed me the lever. The Atherton mansion was a sea of white orchids and expensive champagne. Victoria was standing under a floral arch that had been meticulously designed to frame her as the center of the universe, a center funded entirely by my stolen security. James and Nicole were in the front row, wearing the smug, self-congratulatory smiles of parents who had successfully traded one daughter's life for another's vanity. Then the music stopped. I walked through the double doors not as a guest or a sister, but as the senior financial inspector executing a final, lethal audit. I was not alone. 2 police officers and a stone-faced representative from the non-profit foundation followed me up the aisle. The silence that fell over the garden was heavy, sudden, and suffocating. James stood up, his face shifting from fabricated joy to a mask of sharp irritation. "Emily, what are you doing? You are ruining your sister's day with this dramatic scene," he said. I did not answer with words. I simply handed him the legal folder containing the notice of Lis Pendens and the immediate eviction order. "This house is not yours to sell, James, and it was certainly not yours to use as a venue," I said, my voice cutting through the humid afternoon like a blade. I looked at Victoria, whose influencer-perfect mascara was already beginning to run as she gripped her bouquet with trembling hands. I looked at Austin, the real estate broker who had facilitated the theft-funded sale of my foundation assets. "The $300,000 you took from my savings is already flagged as stolen charity funds," I continued, projecting my voice so every high society guest could hear the truth. "And Austin, the district attorney is reviewing your license for your role in laundering these assets." The power flip was instantaneous. James's hands began to shake as he realized that my competence was not an unsecured loan, but a prison trap. Nicole's eyes went red as she lunged toward me, not with her usual arrogance, but with the desperate, ugly begging of someone who realizes the status she rented with my money has just expired. "Please, Emily," she whispered, her voice cracking in front of the very people she had tried to impress for decades. "We are your parents. We only wanted to help your sister get the start she deserved. We will pay it back. Do not do this to us. Think of the family name." I looked at her, and for a split second, I saw the hospital hallway and the silver pen they had used to harvest my life while I was drugged and vulnerable. "You chose 60 minutes of cocktail hour and $300 bridesmaid dresses over my basic human autonomy," I said, my tone as flat and clinical as an audit report. "You audited my soul and decided it was a communal resource. I have simply closed the account." The representative from the charity board stepped forward, his voice echoing across the silent lawn. "You have exactly 60 minutes to remove your personal belongings from this property before you are arrested for criminal trespassing and federal fraud." A perfect wedding collapsed into a federal crime scene in minutes, Victoria shrieked. Realizing her influencer career was ending with a viral video of her being evicted in her $750 an hour gown, James and Nicole were reduced to strangers standing on land they had no right to touch. I turned my back on them and walked toward the gate. The audit was complete, the court's decision was decisive and final. James was sentenced to a term of actual prison time for his primary role in the document forgery and the exploitation of my vulnerability while I was in medical recovery. Nicole and Victoria were saddled with joint and several liability for complete restitution, including the original $300,000 plus compounded interest and legal penalties. They were forced into a forced sale of their larger home and had to relocate to a small 2-bedroom apartment with thin walls and basic amenities. This was the illusion of power from an empty wallet. I watched their standing erode in the social circles they had nurtured for decades. Their status had never been a reflection of their character. It was merely a costume they had rented using my stolen security as a down payment. Once the capital was gone, they had no internal value left to stand on, and the social elite they craved to impress turned their backs instantly. Victoria's fallout was swift and brutal. Her career as an influencer turned to ash as the video of her wedding eviction went viral for all the wrong reasons. Her husband, Austin, filed for divorce once he realized the fortune he thought he was marrying into had been audited into non-existence. He was delicensed for his role in the real estate fraud, and Victoria was left isolated, with former bridesmaids and friends offering only surface sympathy before permanently keeping their distance. I have implemented absolute separation. I have blocked every phone number and filtered every incoming email directly to the trash. I have declined every attempt at prison correspondence from my father. For the first time in 39 years, I have found a silence that is not oppressive, but peaceful. This is my letter to those who have always felt they were standing at the edge, the ones who have been treated as a financial resource rather than a human being. You were never a worthless burden. Regardless of what they told you to keep you compliant, you were a sentinel waiting for the clarity to act. Sometimes the greatest act of self-love is not a forced forgiveness, but the total and permanent severance of toxic ties. Do not wait for them to see your worth. Audit your own life. Close the accounts that no longer serve you, and build your own peace. True freedom is the silence that follows the final line of a completed audit. If you believe that boundaries are a form of self-love, share this video with someone who needs the courage to speak their truth. Subscribe for more stories of justice.